Penguin Random House Audio presents Nothing But Courage, the 82nd Airborne's daring D-Day mission and their heroic charge across the Fière Bridge, by James Donovan. Read for you by Mark Deakins. For Jacqueline. Prologue. June 6, 1944. About 2:10 a.m. When his transport plane emerged from the fog bank around 700 feet over the fields of France's Cotentin Peninsula, Lieutenant Robert Moss of H Company 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment was standing in the open doorway at the rear of the cabin. The air rushing by his face was cold, and the drone of the C-47's twin engines deafening. The moon was near full and high in the ink-dark sky. Red, blue, and green tracers arced up past the plane, and black-gray puffs of flak exploded all around, each one sending hundreds of jagged metal fragments in all directions. It was the finest fireworks show any of them had ever seen, beautiful yet terrifying. They hadn't taken any direct hits yet, but each concussion from the bursting shells rocked the plane, and the 17 heavily laden troopers standing behind their platoon leader in the dark cabin, left arms raised, their hands gripping the static lines hooked to the metal anchor cable running the length of the cabin ceiling, held on for dear life. They were getting edgy, pushing and surging against Moss, swearing and urging him to jump. But something was wrong. He couldn't see any other planes, and the red ready light next to the doorway had been on far too long. Why hadn't the green light next to it come on? At 30, Moss was one of his company's oldest men, a Virginian who had enlisted and volunteered for the Airborne. He'd been selected for Officers Candidate School, OCS, after jump training, and graduated as a second lieutenant. In September 1942, he'd used a week-long furlough to go home to Richmond and marry his sweetheart, Helen. Moss hadn't seen her or their 11-month-old baby girl in 6 months. He wanted very much to see them again. As Moss prepared himself to jump, the ready light still glowing red, the crew chief made his way down the narrow aisle through the scrum of men and equipment and told him the pilots couldn't find the drop zone, DZ. They were lost. Did the lieutenant want to go back to England? Behind Moss, his troopers were getting louder. He knew they'd throw him out and follow him before they'd return over the channel, or kill him when they got back. Moss said, "Are we over France?" "Yes." "Give us the green light. We're going." A moment later, he leaped out the door. The static line pulled his chute free, and the jerk when it billowed out and filled was wrenching but welcome. Below him, he could see what looked like a large pasture. As a strong wind carried him past it, he realized it was the Memoir River, one of the features they had studied. Normally a modest little stream, now it looked flooded over a vast area. Then houses came up, and a few seconds later he slammed through the thatched roof of a stone barn. He hung in a corner just a foot from the floor, swinging from wall to wall. Oddly enough, in a night training jump a few months earlier, he had dropped through the thatched roof of an English farmhouse into the farmer's bedroom, where he and his wife were in bed. Now Moss pulled a trench knife from his boot holster and slashed the right suspension lines of his parachute. Hanging by his left shoulder, still banging back and forth, he heard German voices outside, and a Schmeisser machine pistol fired through the open doorway. By the moonlight outside, Moss could see 2 figures approaching. He grasped his .45 pistol in its shoulder holster, but it had a hair trigger and went off, barely missing his arm. He started shooting. A German soldier came in firing his Schmeisser, and one of Moss's .45 slugs hit him and knocked him back against the wall, where he slid to the floor and didn't get up. Moss grabbed his knife and slashed the left suspension lines and dropped to the ground. Still in his harness, he scrambled over to the open doorway and looked out. The other German stood 6 feet away. Moss shot him, and the soldier spun around and fell dead. Moss crawled through the doorway and around the side of the barn, then got to his feet, dashed down a driveway to a road, and ran across it into the dark cover of an apple orchard. He could hear gunfire in the distance. He stayed in the shadows of the trees to catch his breath and cut away his harness, then spent the next hour reconnoitering. He didn't see a single soul, friend, enemy, or Frenchman, but he found out he was on the outskirts of a village named Chef du Pont. He knew where that was, and he knew it wasn't where he was supposed to be. He set out west, through the patchwork bocage of small fields and thick hedgerows, toward what sounded like M1 rifle fire, in search of his men. They had a bridge to take and to hold, and they had to do it soon. Introduction. The French people are now slaves. Only a successful overlord can free them. General Dwight D. Eisenhower. In the spring of 1944, the world was at war. For 4 long years, Western Europe had abided its Nazi overlords. After swift campaigns in Poland and Scandinavia, Germany had invaded the Low Countries, Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands, and France. 6 weeks later, the Nazi blitzkrieg had overrun all 4. Adolf Hitler now controlled the whole of mainland Europe, and every country, save for a few neutral ones, was soon occupied by Wehrmacht troops. Only England across the Channel held firm, withstanding the 4-month Luftwaffe onslaught known as the Battle of Britain, which caused Hitler to cancel his planned assault on the island nation. And Germany's invasion of Russia in June 1941, expected to be another lightning-quick victory, had been met by fierce resistance. The Russian bear, awakened, angry, and battered, had recovered and pushed back, and was now steadily advancing westward through Eastern Europe toward Germany's eastern border. Pitted against the Axis powers of Germany and Japan, after their former ally Italy surrendered in September 1943, were the Allies, the Big Three of the United Kingdom, the Soviet Union, and the United States, with several others. They had successfully invaded North Africa in November 1942, Sicily in July 1943, and southern Italy in September. But the progress up through the mountainous Italian peninsula against stubborn German troops was slow and costly, anything but the soft underbelly of Europe, as described by British Prime Minister Winston Churchill. Soviet losses defending their homeland were obscenely massive. By May 1944, 16 million dead, civilian and military, with tens of thousands more every week. Since 1941, Premier Joseph Stalin had been calling for a Western front to reduce the Wehrmacht's focus on his country. The U.S. agreed that an invasion of Western Europe would present the most direct way to engage German forces, but an exhausted England, recovering from the near calamity of Dunkirk, the stalwart defense against large-scale German air attacks during the Battle of Britain, and the heavy bombardment known as the Blitz, resisted. It was not until May 1943, after the Atlantic Ocean had been largely cleared of German U-boats, allowing the necessary buildup of men and materiel in England, that a cross-channel invasion of Hitler's Festung Europa, Fortress Europe, was set for the next year, and a date chosen, May 1st, 1944. By early 1944, the plan, code-named Operation Overlord, with its initial assault stages code-named Operation Neptune, had been decided upon. Landings by 5 Army divisions on as many beaches along Normandy's Channel coastline, with massive air and naval bombardments to soften up the German defenses. They would be supported by 3 airborne divisions dropped inland several hours before the early morning seaborne assault. In charge of what would be the largest amphibious invasion ever attempted was General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the supreme commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force. He had never led men in battle, but he had proven himself overseeing the invasions of North Africa and Italy. His directive from the combined chiefs of staff was unequivocal. You will enter the continent of Europe and, in conjunction with the other United Nations, undertake operations aimed at the heart of Germany and the destruction of her armed forces. If the Allies could establish a firm foothold in Normandy and hold it, they could follow with more troops and equipment, then drive through France and into the heart of Nazi Germany to destroy the Third Reich.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?